We ready to begin, Jessica? You got the numbers? Okay, well, great. Well, welcome everyone. This is our I'm glad to say that, second annual Lifelong Learning Summer Series. For those who don't know me, my name is Scott Sherwalk. I'm the director of the MAC program here at NC State. This is the first of three topics that we're going to be having this summer. This is on imposter syndrome. And the topics we're using, by the way, were provided by some of you. We reached out to people that participated in the series last summer. And we said, what would you like these three sessions to be? And so you provided us the support, and that is what we've used. We hope this will be helpful in supporting you, which is the whole intent of this, on your professional lifelong journey that each one of you are on today. So Jessica, if we can go to the next slide. I just want to mention to you what else is coming after today. The next session that you'll see in June is actually Paul Munter. Paul Munter is the chief accountant with SEC. We're going to have a dialogue with Paul. I'm going to ask him some questions, but it's going to give you plenty of time to ask him questions. You may want to ask, what they could do with that SGS reporting. What's going to happen to environmental reporting? Are they going to do anything about it or not? To give you a chance to ask those questions. I'm not sure we'll be able to answer them, but we can at least ask the question. And then we have Brad Kirtland coming back. One of the things we heard a lot about was we're now working in teams and hybrid, and even though we continue to do it, we can continue to struggle with it. So that was another topic that we have. And so Jessica, if you can go to the next slide. We also want to remind you of our summit that's coming up on September the 22nd is live here on campus. Love to have you participate in that. Three things I will mention. It does include ethics CPE that you need for those of you looking for ethics CPE. Plan on that. You don't need to do that ahead of time. We're going to have Tracy and Russell Golden. Those names may or may not be familiar. Tracy was the former chair of the AICPA. And her husband, Russell Goldman, was the chair of the FASB. All I will say is, can you imagine their conversations around the dinner table? Okay, so it's probably pretty interesting. So we're going to have them be our kind of keynote and talk about the various things in the profession. We're going to have a session on chat, GPT on that. And we have two more open sessions. And if you have any ideas, we'd like to hear from you. So we have some ideas as well, but we'd like, if there's anything particular you'd like to fit in that summit, please send an email to myself or Jessica, and we'll be glad to be able to see if we can put something together for you in that. So let me go to the next slide, which is the proverbial CPE slide that you all see every time you do this. And just to remind yourself that you need to be in for the 50 minutes if you're doing this for CPE, respond to the questions you'll get. And it'd be very, very helpful to us if you respond to the survey to give us, what worked for you and what didn't work for you. So with that, I'm going to move in and introduce our speaker today because I want to give her as much time as possible today. So we're very fortunate today to have Deborah Porter. She's a sought-after influential voice and on-air media contributor for parenting, motherhood, and work-life balance. Not much going on in that space, is there? Okay. Her work helps to reduce the cost of turnover to businesses among their working parents by navigating the demands and pressures of the intersection of that work, family, and life that we all have. She's a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University up in Richmond. She's worked in the criminal justice field before growing a family of 3 adult kids and ultimately starting her own coaching and consulting business. She currently lives in DC area. So Deborah, I will turn the day over to you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first life learning session for 2023. I'm excited to be your first speaker, and thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go right ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. And this is our topic today. We're going to be talking about not just the fact that imposter syndrome is a thing, but really my goal today is to leave you with some tips, some strategies, and ways to address and deal with it when it comes up. Now, you may say, oh, this really isn't impacting me right now. Just live a little bit longer, move a little bit further in your career. And I think each of us can speak to at some point or at some place in our life where imposter syndrome may have shown up. And I'll also address many of the different ways that imposter syndrome can present. So today, here's what I hope that we'll cover. We'll talk about what it is. We'll give examples of how it shows up. We'll talk about some expectations, maybe things that we put on ourselves, maybe expectations of others that are put on us. We'll talk about what feeds imposter syndrome. And really the meat of what I want to talk about is how to starve it, how to literally cut off the oxygen supply and the nourishment and the nutrients that we sometimes unknowingly provide it. But I want to get started with a scenario. I want to start, and just in the spirit of full disclosure, of one of my imposter moments in my career. This is a true story. There was a woman who was playing in a park with her children, her 3 children. I think they were ages 9, 7, and 5. This woman was stabbed by her estranged husband while they're in the park, and she later passed away from those injuries. Once this gentleman was arrested, the public defender's office was assigned. I was the criminal investigator for this particular public defender's office in a small town here in Virginia. Now, I was the only investigator because this was a smaller office. The office I came from, there was a senior investigator who I supported. So generally, this type of case would have gone to Bill Smith. Bill's a great guy. Well, there was no Bill. So this case came to me, and immediately the first thoughts that rose up were, you're used to being the support. You're not used to being the senior investigator. This is a big deal. How are you going to handle this? And at that point, I knew that the detectives that had been put on the case had been handling murder cases combined for longer than I had been on the earth. So there was just this added pressure of their experience versus, do I have enough experience? Their years into my years in and my years even on the planet. So I had a job to do. So setting all of that aside, I got in my state vehicle to head to the crime scene. So as I'm heading to the crime scene, it's not a crime scene that you would normally see on some of the crime shows, right? With the yellow tape and all of that. That's what the detectives get to show up as a result of the 911 call. I'm coming in after we've been appointed to this gentleman as his counsel. So yellow tape is gone. There's not a whole lot going on. Generally, I step onto these scenes and I'm the only one there. So the plan was to go to the park first, where the crime happened, take some pictures, get some measurements, and then to go to the home, because that is where the gentleman was arrested. So I go to the park, I do what I'm supposed to do. I get back in the car with my pictures and all of that. And I head to the apartment where this gentleman was arrested, which was the family apartment. I pull up, and to my surprise, the detectives are there outside in front of the apartment. At this point, I don't know why, because I know that they've already had access to this scene for over a week now. I later found out that kind of a ploy that they used to kind of intimidate a little bit. They had given me what they thought was an affectionate kind of nickname, newbie. So I grabbed my stuff and I'm like, okay, they're here. So, but in that moment, I knew that what I had to do was remind myself of what I do well. I had to begin reminding myself of cases that I had worked before. I had to remind myself of the rapists that we were able to, not only had he been arrested, but we were able to build a defense that the family, and come up with a plea agreement that the family actually supported, the victim's family, that also satisfied the heinous crime that had been committed. So I just began kind of rehearsing in my own mind cases that I had worked on, how certain defense plans had been built around the actual investigations. So I get myself pumped up, what I think is pumped up. I grab the information, folder, file, camera, measuring tape, all the things. I get out the car. Of course, the detectives greet me. Hey, newbie. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you? Exchange pleasantries. I go inside, and as I walk in this apartment, I realize I've actually been in this apartment before, and I couldn't figure out why. So I look at the folder again, and suddenly the victim's name jumps off the page at me. She was a probationer of mine. Prior to being a criminal investigator, I was a probation and parole officer. She was a probationer of mine. And so I knew things about this family and this dynamic that I knew the detectives did not yet know, because I knew that during some of the abuse that was going on, I had been there and seen some of the holes that had been punched in the walls. I knew that she had left that apartment more than once barefoot, trying to escape. But I also knew she'd never called the police because she wanted what she perceived would be a nuclear family. And so I did my job. I took my measurements. I took my photos. It was not my responsibility to disclose any of this to the detectives. The attorneys handle all of that in court with discovery motions and the like. I did my job. I left. I got back to the office. I reported back what I knew of this woman. I even checked back with the probation office where I worked and was able to get some information, provided them all of that information. And as a result of that, because the family did not want the children to have to testify against their father being so young, because the victim's mother was old and not in good health, she didn't want to see pictures of her daughter on a big screen in a courtroom. We were able to reach a plea deal that the family was satisfied with that also put this man away for the rest of his life. And so I share that story with you because what I think we do sometimes, I think we count ourselves out too soon. So imposter syndrome is doubting my own ability or fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of success. Now, having a criminal studies background, evidence jumped off the page at me because I know about evidence. I know that the chain of custody for evidence is important. I know how you preserve the evidence is important. And so as I look at this definition and I think about it, doubting my own ability or fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of success. What is this evidence? This evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or a proposition is true or valid. And so I want us to be aware that there are times we're counting ourselves out too soon, which I almost did. I remember calling Bill before I headed out to that crime scene. I thought, okay, Bill, this is what we've got. This is how I'm thinking about it. Am I on the right track? Absolutely, you're on the right track. You got this. You can do this. So when we'll talk more about those people that we can call when things like that come up. But I think we count ourselves out a little bit too soon. And then here's the other thing that I want us to be thinking about. Imposter syndrome is frequently found, not always, but frequently found among high performers. Why? Because high achievers are likely to set high personal standards. And sometimes we're setting those standards so high and so beyond that any kind of failure or problem, we then feel like there's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with what we can produce. There's something wrong with how we're showing up. And so as we go on, I want to talk about 5 ways to starve imposter syndrome. But first, I really want to talk about what is it and how does it present? And here are a couple of ways that I want us to think about. Imposter syndrome sometimes is feeling like you're not enough or that you don't deserve the success, the promotion, the opportunity that's been presented to you. Sometimes it's presented by comparing yourself to others, feeling like they're more qualified, more intelligent than you. Sometimes it's attributing your success to factors outside of your control. I used to work with a young lady who would do this. So we would compliment her on work she had done, pushing a project to the finish line. And she would say things like, oh, I guess the stars just aligned for me that day. And I want us to be careful how we're talking about and sometimes downplaying our own success, because none of you are here because of stargazing or luck. You're here because of the hard work that you've put in, the time that you've put in, and the dedication that you've given to your chosen field. So with that in mind, another way that imposter syndrome presents is fearing that you'll be exposed as a fraud or fake, downplaying achievements, or setting impossibly high standards for yourself. So before I move on to what feeds imposter syndrome, does any of what I just mentioned ring true for anybody? You can just put a thumbs up in the chat if you don't want to actually share anything in specific. But I'd just like to know, does any of this ring true to anyone? Does it sound familiar? Does it sound like something that you've experienced or you're familiar with? Okay, I see a thumbs up, couple thumbs up, great, fantastic. Okay, I'm in the right room, awesome. So let's move on. And let's talk about what feeds imposter syndrome, because before we can starve it, we really need to know how we're feeding it. And we need to know how we're providing nourishment to it. And so here's the first piece. This one is important. Now, these are in no particular order, but I think that regardless of the order, this one definitely is first. Negative self-talk. The way you talk to yourself about yourself really matters, because how you talk to yourself about yourself and how you think about yourself impacts how you show up. And how you show up impacts what you do. And what you do impacts your outcome. And hear this, it also impacts your income. And so it's important to be aware of the silent conversations that we have going on, because it absolutely impacts and influences how we show up on any given day. Fear of not being enough is another way that we can feed imposter syndrome. This idea that somehow I'm not enough. For me, it was, I don't have enough experience at this. Am I the girl for the job? And it can show up, this is not just in your professional life. Be on guard, because this can also show up in your personal life, in other relationships, if you're a parent, whatever other roles you have in your life, whatever other hats you're wearing. So the idea or the fear of not being enough can create almost a type of analysis paralysis, right? We're almost fearful in moving forward because we don't want to mess up, but then we're fearful that if we don't do something, we'll be perceived as not knowing what to do. So be on guard when fear shows up, because fear generally has us almost like the deer in headlights or the squirrel, right? Just kind of not sure which way to go across the road. Not knowing your value. If you don't know your value, if you're not aware of what it is you're bringing to the table, but also to the team and also to who you work for, if you're not aware of how valuable the knowledge and information that you have is, then you're probably not communicating it clearly, which means that you may not be being compensated appropriately. So not knowing your value, just not being aware of that, or not being able to verbalize that, can also be something that feeds imposter syndrome. And then lastly, comparing ourselves to others. This is an age-old problem and dilemma that has probably been made more visible and more kind of in our face because of social media, right? I love the moms, and I follow, a bunch of people, as all of us do, on all these different platforms. But I love it when the folks give me a bit of the behind the scenes, right? I love the amazing Christmas photo, but I like when they just kind of pan left and the house is a wreck. Or they'll show the pictures before the actual picture where the little brother just kind of like slapped his sister and she's crying. Like, it just lets me know, okay, it's not about being perfect. It's not about even setting that as a goal. It's more about being content and being real and living in and living through what my own core values are. Because if I'm comparing me to someone else, it's not even apples to oranges. It's like apples to, a Maserati. Like it's complete. You don't know what you don't know about someone else's journey. You don't know if what you're looking at is even real. And so comparing ourselves to others can be a major, major feeder for imposter syndrome. So here we are. This is where we really want to be, right here. What starves imposter syndrome? Before I step into that, any comments, questions, anything in the chat at all around these other things that feed it? Comparing ourselves to others. Is that something you've done before? Is it something you've caught yourself doing? Are you aware of your own value? We'll be sure at the end of this to have a Q&A, and we'll just open it up. You can come off camera and off mic and just share whatever questions, comments that you have. But I just want to pause here just for a second to see if anyone has anything they'd like to share around this idea of not knowing your value, fear of not being enough, negative self-talk. And it's usually not coming out, right? It's the negative self-thought, maybe is a better way to describe it. Leah says, comparison, yes, fear, negative self-talk. Jennifer says, is imposter syndrome impacted by gender? That's a great question, Jennifer, that I don't know the answer to. But that would be something great to really dive into. My guess, if I were to guess, my guess would be that women probably suffer a little bit more with imposter syndrome, partly because of just the dynamics of the workplace, which are, changing all the time. But I think that part of it is the dynamic of what's going on. I think it's also the dynamic of us wanting to step in and step up and speak up for what we now need. So that would be my guess, but again, that's not scientific and it's not definite. Lisa says not knowing value. Thank you. I appreciate that. All of that is very, very common. So let's go ahead and get to the meat of it. Let's talk about what starves it. How do we deprive it from oxygen, nourishment? How do we cut all of that off so that as it attempts to arise or show up, that we have a strategy or a system or something in place to begin to combat it and fight back? So we want to combat the negative self-talk by identifying our strengths. And so whether your strengths are communication, functional, managerial, leadership, industry or specialized, soft or hard skill, natural, technical, professional, personal, whatever your strengths are, here's what I would suggest. I would suggest writing out 2, 3, 4 strengths that you have, things that you do well. And I suggest writing it out and also reading it as you're writing it. And here's why. This may seem very elementary, but there really is a science behind it. The more of your senses that you can involve in an exercise like this, the more it begins to seep in. So if you can write it, then you're seeing it. If you can say it, then you're hearing it. So this is going to involve a lot of your senses. So I would suggest combating the negative self-talk by actually writing out 2 or 3 strengths that you have. I'd love to see the chat fill with strengths that you each know you have. Just share one. I'm going to put one of mine in here. I know one thing I'm a finisher. If you give me something to do, it will be done. I will do it from beginning to end. I don't need a whole lot of reminders. I don't need to be prompted. I know that I'm going to do it. Okay, a lot of organized people here. I love it. That's awesome. Doer. Yep, me as well. Excel formulas. Love it. Fantastic. Efficient with time management. Organized. I love this. That's why we're all here. Detail oriented, honest. Love this. And here's the thing. Sometimes we're not quite sure, because sometimes our strength is something that we do almost like second nature. So for us, we don't even perceive it as a strength. It's just kind of what we do. And so what I would suggest is folks that you trust, couple really good friends that you have, either professional and or personal, people that you are able and willing to be vulnerable with, ask them, what do you think I'm really good at? Like, you've known me for X amount of years, you've worked with me, or we've done life together, or we've been friends forever. What would you say is a strength of mine? Sometimes outside eyes can view our strengths in a way that we tend to either dismiss or just assume everybody's good at this. Problem solver. Oh, Kathy says people can use the Clifton Strength Finder to help determine. Absolutely. Leah says attention to detail. Yes, the Clifton Strengths Finder is a great resource for that. So combat the negative self-talk with identifying your strengths. And there are times that you're going to have to almost remind yourself of your own strengths, much like I had to do once I drove up and saw those detectives there. I had to remind myself, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm good at what I do. And I bring results. And my results at times have caused an entire defense to be based on the investigations that I was able to complete. Learner, responsible, love it. Okay, number 2, Identify how and where your strengths provide value to your team and organization. So number one has to be done before you can do number two. You've got to know what those strengths are to know where is there a hole, where is there a gap, where is there something lacking or missing in our team, in our organization, in the project we're working on, and what strength do I have that can plug that hole, that can not only plug the hole, but then also provide value, which may also provide an ROI for the organization, which might also push this project to the finish line. So identify those strengths, but then once you identify them, how do they fit into the team and the organization that you're working with? How does that close up a gap or close up a hole? Once you've done both of those things, we've got to figure out how to create a communication plan to convey that value. And I know for many of us, it can be challenging communicating our own contribution, our own successes. It may feel a little awkward. People, may say, "Oh, you can't really pat yourself on the back." Well, I think there are appropriate ways to do that. I think there are valuable ways to do that. And I think when we're talking about something that has created great value, there's got to be a way for you to be able to clearly communicate. I was really happy to be able to bring this to the finish line with XYZ. I was really happy to work with the team to be able to add my whatever that is. It's not a negative. And people do this regularly. And listen, we've got people doing this and taking credit for other people's work and the value that other people have brought. So you've got to know what your strengths are. You've got to know how they bring value to your team and your organization. And you've got to know how to communicate that in a way that doesn't come off as braggadocious, but really comes off in real concrete ways, right? When I went up for my first evaluation as a criminal investigator, I was able to say, we've had these 4 cases, and the defense for each of them was built around my investigation. I think what I'm doing is not only helping, but I think it's actually giving you what you need to be able to build a defense. That's concrete. That's just not, I did that, like, I want to thank you. No, here are the facts. And so keeping track of that may also be necessary. And we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. Celebrate the successes. Let me just pause there. Because many times life is going so quickly, requirements, deadlines, stuff is being brought to us so quickly that we don't take the moment to really just sit in the success before we're just like, oh, okay, that's done, on to the next thing. So give yourself a moment to celebrate the successes, while at the same time being able to lean into the uneasiness of the next and the new, because that's where the growth happens. Even though it feels difficult, my concern sometimes is that we associate discomfort and difficult with fear, right? It doesn't have to be fearful. It's just, it's discomfort. But discomfort is not always a negative. It's not always bad. Discomfort is actually where we grow. So find that healthy tension between celebrating the success, but then being able to lean into what's next and what may not feel, super easy or super smooth, but it may have a few bumps to allow you to grow, even though it may feel difficult. But allow yourself the moment to celebrate. This is very, very important. I mentioned earlier how when I first got that murder investigation that was going to be mine to handle, I immediately, came up with my plan of attack, but then I called Bill. Bill was the senior investigator that I had worked under for many years at that point. Who is on your advisory board? Do you have an advisory board? You may be thinking, well, what exactly is an advisory board? An advisory board is very different from a board of directors. An advisory board helps companies being you, make strategic decisions by providing expert knowledge and guidance. So this board is made up of mentors, confidants. Listen, maybe a therapist. We can have those too. Professional and personal friends, people that you trust, people that you value, and people that value you, people that you can be vulnerable with, people that you can receive from, people that you give permission to kind of pull your coattail, maybe correct you, maybe remind you, maybe hold you accountable for that goal that you set, that you've just kind of let kind of go by the wayside. So begin to think about who would be on this board of mine? What would it look like? And who would I invite onto it to just be the folks that not just keep me honest, but help me to move forward. These are the folks that are going to help me to grow. These are the folks that are going to allow me to show up with all of my faults and flaws, while at the same time not allowing me to get stuck in the fault and the flaw, but allowing me and pushing me and encouraging me to continue to go forward. So here's something that's really important for us to remember. And this is high performers and high earners know their strengths and they can communicate them well. They understand what they bring to the table. They understand how to communicate it, and they're not ashamed of it. They're not bashful about it. They don't feel awkward doing it. High performers and high owners know their strengths and can communicate them well. Proper communication and demonstration of those strengths can lead to increased income. It's folks that are able to connect what they've done to the bottom line that many times we'll see get the promotions, get the increase in salary. And so I'm hoping that as I've gone through these slides, that you're able to contextualize and find places where some of these principles fit in your own life, right? Every single one of these may not be something that you need right now. But as you move in your career and as you continue to go on and as you continue to grow and learn more, I think that you'll begin to see how each of these in their own way can fit and provide value for where you are now and for where you want to go. Ginger says, we don't give ourselves the time to sit in successes, but we have no trouble sitting in the failures. Well, if that's not a word, that is the absolute truth. If you get some type of eval back, right? Or if you get some feedback or some type of review, you can get 10s across the board for 5 questions. If there's one question or comment that is not a 10 or somehow is not, that ideal score, that's the thing that we sit with. That's the thing that we're reminded of. That's the thing that replays back and forth over and over again in our own minds. So you're absolutely right, Ginger. Ricky says, how do you balance imposter syndrome versus actually not having the knowledge and experience needed? Love that question. So the idea of not having the knowledge or experience means there's an opportunity, an avenue, a place for you to gain it, right? There's a way for you to learn it. Imposter syndrome is the thought process that even what I know is not enough. So wherever you are and whatever it is that you do know, the skill sets that you do have are valuable in that setting. There's always more for us to learn. None of us ever reach the place where we've got it all. There is a constant learning and gaining of knowledge and a gaining of experience. So that never, ever ends. Imposter syndrome comes in to try to convince you that even what you know is not good enough. So the goal here isn't to get to the place where there's nothing else to learn or we've got all the knowledge we need. That's a lifelong pursuit. Be on guard when imposter syndrome comes up to try to convince you that even what you know is not good enough, it's not enough, it's not needed, you're false, you're a fake, it's not true. So I hope that answered your question. So a few more here, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions. I want to go back to one of those first slides that says imposter syndrome, doubting my own ability, or fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of success. I really want to hang on this word evidence for a minute. And I want to ask you, how are you preserving your own evidence of success? Because we all have it. We all have evidence of our success. And I'll share a couple of different ways that it may come at you. It may simply be a compliment on a Zoom call or a meeting, whether virtual or in person. It may be some kind of accolade that you're given. It may be some type of encouragement that you're given. It may be something that's offered to you publicly. How are you preserving that? It may be in an email, right? Someone may send out an email and thank everybody that kind of had their part in it. Really want to give a big shout out to that person is you. What do you do with that? Because here's the point. You may not need that encouragement or that kind of atta-girl, atta-boy comment today, but there may come a day that you need it. And so I want to share with you what the FBI says are the 5 steps to preserving evidence, because I want you to begin to preserve your own evidence of success in a way that you can access it, get to it when you need it. In those moments of imposter syndrome, when you're wondering about, am I good enough? Do I have what it takes for this? Should I go for this promotion? Maybe I should wait. I want you to have a place to go where you have some proof, where you have some evidence of the things that you've done wrong, done right, so that the things you're learning from do not begin to take over. Okay, so here's what the FBI says are the 5 steps to preserving evidence. 1, obtain it. So once you obtain it, once you get that text thanking you for what you did, once you get that email, that shout out on that Zoom call, whatever it may have been, okay, you've now obtained it. Describe it. Again, this is, I tend to put pen to paper, again, because I want to involve as many of my 5 senses as possible. But if your way to do it is more on laptop, that's fine. But I want you to obtain it. I want you then to describe it, meaning give a little, to remind yourself, just give a little context around what this was around. Got this email from Bill the other day concerning whatever the project was. I want you to identify it for what it is. Was it a compliment? Was it an atta-girl? Was it, did you get it was an actual award of some sort? So obtain it. Once you obtained it, describe it, just give a little context because we forget. Identify what it was. It was a text. This was a text. This was a phone call. This was an email. This one was a voice message. And I want you to begin to package it. I want you to figure out what is the best way to place all of these pieces of evidence of your own success. How do you preserve them? Whether it's in a file on your computer, a lot of us put everything we own on notes on our phone, that'll work. But I want you, once you've obtained it, once you've described it, once you've identified it, I want you to put it somewhere. I want you to have it somewhere. So in the moments of thinking and wondering, am I, should I, what? I want you to be able to get to it, to then be able to read through as a reminder for yourself. Okay, I've taken this evidence, I've properly preserved it, I've obeyed the different, processes here that even the FBI suggests for the preserving of evidence. And then number 5, I want you to maintain it. I want you to update it from time to time as new pieces of evidence come in, speaking to your own success. I want you to continue to add to it. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of this is to support you. Maintain the integrity of the evidence for later testing or analysis. We will always be tested. There are going to be situations, there are going to be dynamics. It may be office dynamics, it may be office politics, it may be office culture. It can be all kinds of things. We are going to be tested. And for some of us, we suffer with analysis paralysis. We're overanalyzing before we even get to the bottom line of what we're going to do. We're trying to figure out, should I do this? Is this going to work for me? Let me come up with a do's and don'ts list. Nothing wrong with all of that, unless it's taking you to the place of analysis paralysis and you've now done nothing. So I want you to maintain the integrity of the evidence of your own success for those later moments when life is testing you and when you're overanalyzing your own contribution and strengths that you bring to the table. Your value and what you bring will have to be communicated by you. People may thank you. You may get all kinds of attaboys and attagirls. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about an increase in income, an increase in position, you're going to have to be able to communicate that. So maintain the integrity of your evidence so that when you need it, you know exactly where it is. Listen, in criminal investigations, if the chain of custody of the evidence is broken, you can lose a case just on that. No matter what other evidence, you can have an eyewitness. But if the prosecutor can show that somehow the chain of the evidence was tampered with, you can lose the case. So I want you to take these moments that you have this proof, this evidence of your success. I want you to treat it like it deserves to be treated. And I want you to maintain it. I want you to protect it. I want you to have it so that when you need it, you can go back to it and access it. So we are about 45 minutes in. I want to go ahead and stop here, and I want to be able to take any questions, any comments. I also just want to put up this information about me. If you want to look on the website, if I can support you in any way, please feel free to follow me. I'd love that as well. But I'm going to get ready and stop sharing my screen. And I just want to open up the floor for any comments, questions, feedback on any of the points that we discussed today. So feel free to come off mic. You can stay off camera if you want, no big deal.
Hi, Deborah. I'm Lisa. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Lisa. Nice to meet you.
I just want to start off by saying that this was very impactful. So thank you. Also, I really appreciate how when you were describing entering the crime scene, that you were thinking about what you do well and not to be intimidated by all that was going on and could kind of blow off being called a newbie. So I do appreciate that. One of the things that I have really gained today is to think about, I've never really been able to explain or communicate my strengths, which is terrible for me. You know, I know what I do, I kind of think about it, but I've never really been able to identify it specifically to an employer, for example. And just recently, one of the things that I've come up with is when I'm given titles and they don't really match what I view my strengths are, and sometimes even what I'm doing. And so just recently I thought, well, I'm going to come up with a story for LinkedIn, not in depth, but not that my title explains who I am, but what I say my strengths are explains who I am. And so that's the thing that I want to identify and be able to explain to let people know what I bring to the table. I know I bring something. I just need to identify what that is. So I like all of the pointers that you've given about thinking about those strengths, identifying them, and then being able to express that.
I love that, Lisa. I love that.
I know that Kathy gave the site to go, and find the strengths, and I'll look into that. But do you have any recommendations about ways to identify that and how to communicate it?
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for being the brave one, the first one to ask a question. I appreciate that. I do think that what Kathy has offered, the Clifton Strengths Finder, is a great resource. I think it's a great way. It's respected. And it's generally right on target. You'll find that if you do that, at least most of the folks that I know that have, it pretty much nails us based on the questions that they ask. I have really found it for myself to be important to have human contact when I'm doing something like that as well, hence the advisory board. So people that know you well, it may be people you've worked with, it may be people that you've just done life with. But for me, I like to couple a strengths finder test, so to speak, with an actual human interaction with people that know me well. I process differently when I'm actually engaging with someone than I do reading a report from a computer. But I think both of them have their place, and I think both of them serve you well. So I would suggest a little bit of both.
Okay, I took that into mind as well as you were talking. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And let me just share also that, as we're doing this and as we're finding our way and as we're getting our footing, be careful in the moments of imposter syndrome, because sometimes the pull will be to swing the pendulum in the other direction, right? So if you're feeling like you're not quite measuring up, well, I'll just work more. I'll get another certification. And maybe you'll need another certification, but I'm saying doing this to satisfy this internal battle of, am I enough? Just be careful that you're not feeding it and, oh my goodness, is that a cat? Oh, make sure you're not swinging the pendulum too far in an attempt to continue to feed and satisfy imposter syndrome. So any other questions, comments? I think there's one here. I think your board of advisors could help with curating that with you, Lisa. An anagram, yep, that's another one. That's a great one. Booth Parker says, do you have recommendations when doing a career pivot into a new space when you have been in a very specific role for nearly 2 decades? Yes, so I did something similar, right? I was in criminal investigations, and I often think back and think, my poor kids, they were raised by like a probation officer and a criminal investigator. Like, I look back on some of the ways I questioned them. And I remember one time I was questioned, I know this is a side journey, but I remember questioning my son on something, and my husband, to just kind of break the craziness, he comes with a flashlight and goes, "Where were you at 10:30 last night?" Because I really was kind of interrogating him. And so it just kind of brought a little levity to the situation. But yes, in answering your question, if you already know what the career pivot is, if you already know that you are leaving one career, pivoting to something that leans more towards your strengths or your passion or your interest or something that you can do well, then I think the idea is to get with people that are doing the thing you're now moving into. Begin to spend time with people, have conversations and coffee. I met with a couple of people that were consultants and coaches, and they were generous enough to give me some of their time. Many of them were generous to make introductions for me. So I would suggest that you begin spending time with people that are in the space that you're moving to and that you're moving into, always with an idea and a hope to be able to also bring value to them, right? We always want to make sure that when we're asking for these coffee dates or these opportunities to get together, you want to make sure that you're always offering, is there some way I can support you? Is there an introduction I can make for you? I've, spent 20 years in this field here. Is there anything in that space that I can, pull on to support you? But start connecting with those folks. Start following them on LinkedIn. Start commenting on their posts. Start making yourself known and present in that new career pivot. I hope that answered your question. Anyone else? Questions, comments? I'd love any feedback even on what we've just been talking about today. This is kind of one of those things that people don't speak openly about because it's kind of awkward. So I'm really excited to kind of be your first guest speaker and just kind of crack this open.
Hey, Deborah, this is Scott. I'm wondering if Kelsey's dog thinks they're a cat, if they're impostering. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, I do have a question because a lot of us have mentors. Could you sort of contrast and compare the advisory to the mentor role? Is that a different role? Is that the same role? Help us kind of sort through that, please.
I think mentors are part of your advisory board, right? I think your advisory board is made up of mentors, of professional relationships, personal relationships. So I think a mentor in my mind is someone that is just beyond where I'm wanting to be. They're further along in the journey that I am also traveling. And so they have breadcrumbs in a sense that they can kind of drop along the way for me. So I think that a mentor is part of your advisory board. And I think that no matter where we are in our career or in our profession, that I should always be in both roles. I should always be being mentored, but I should also be being a mentor to someone, because there's someone coming along behind you as well. So even in your own, quest for your next or for whatever's ahead, and you're being mentored, always remember there's still somebody behind you as well that you still can bring value to, that you can still support and help. So I think a mentor is part of the advisory board. Anyone else? Kelsey, she's filling us in. LOL, my dog does not suffer from imposter syndrome. Someone's asking a question. I'm sorry. Okay, we've got one in here. What role do you think social media may play comparing to others? I think social media plays a huge role in it. And I think as a result of that, we've got to be able to understand what our own needs are, our own mental wellness around it. I think, so what I've been doing lately, I set a timer and I only allow myself to be on social media for a certain amount of time, because beyond a certain amount of time, and you set whatever that time is for yourself, but beyond a certain amount of time, for me, it either becomes wasteful or it becomes damaging. And I don't need either of those. And so I try to set a limit for myself of how much time I'm spending there, and really kind of an intention. Why am I getting on social media? Sometimes it's just to be nosy to see where my kids are. My kids are 31, 27, and 25. And they're like my son's in Amsterdam right now. It's like, gee, would have been nice to know that you were leaving the country, but okay, you're an adult. I get it. Have a ball. Just let me know, if I need to know anything. So sometimes it's just to see what and where my kids are, but I get caught in that trap too. I get caught in seeing, these moms that are, making these elaborate lunches and stuff for their kids. And I'm just like, really? Like, can a bologna sandwich satisfy? Like, what are we really doing right now? So you just have to be careful when you know that the time that you're spending on social media, is it helping you? Or is it providing some level of harm? Oh, I know. Someone says the crazy lunchbox. Oh my gosh, this lunchbox lady, you guys. I'm like, who has the time to cut up all these little vegetables every day? Like, I can't. But to answer the question, I think that social media plays a big part. And I think you really have to begin to understand and know for yourself where your limits are. That boundaries are important in every area of our lives, whether that's boundaries at work, boundaries at home, your personal boundaries, but how much time you spend on social media and how it's impacting you. We know this is true, right? We read the studies and see it all the time as it pertains to kids. Well, because their brains are still developing, but for us emotionally and our mental wellness can be impacted as well. So I think it's a big deal. Lisa says, excellent advice to share with my 28-year-old. So there are a couple things I didn't quite get to. I'd love to kind of go a little bit more. Jessica, we have a little extra time. Yeah, okay. So there's just one other piece of this that I really want to kind of to drive home. And it's this idea of work-life balance, which really is its own separate webinar, but I just want to touch on it here. And I want to make sure that the understanding is that there is never going to be a 50-50 split with the things that are going on in your world and in your life, right? Tax time is going to be top heavy, work heavy, right? But then there are going to be moments where things are going on in your family. You may be caregiving for an aging parent. You may be raising kids. You may be newly married. There could be all kinds of different things. The idea here is to make sure that each item is in correct proportion to the other. It's not about being equal, but it's about the correct proportions. And we find that out by really being in tune with what are our own core values. Because if you're not living a life that aligns with your core values, then your work-life balance will always be in flux and frustrating and stressful for you. I'm going to see if I can bend this back just a little bit so you can see what's written above my closet door. It says, no is a complete sentence. And I have that there as a reminder to myself and my family and others that I cannot be all things to all people. I cannot. And my attempt to be that is not only going to stress me out, but it's going to cause me to show up more anxious and more stressed when really what you need from me is help. And so the idea of understanding that on any given day, somebody is going to have to get a no. Somebody's going to have to get a no in your life and in your world. And you got to figure out, am I going to give myself the no again? Am I going to deny myself again the thing that I need to put myself in a better headspace? Am I going to say no to my kid? Is it no to my job? Like, who's getting the no today? Because you only get 24 hours in a day. Just because you're CPAs doesn't mean y'all get 36 hours in a day. You do not. You get the same 24 hours that the rest of us have. And so you've got to figure out, what are my core values? What really matters? What's really important? And sometimes I think people think when we're talking work-life balance, that it's just a cute way to say, I don't want to take my job seriously. That's not what that means at all. It just means that I need to be able to live in a certain way where the things that matter don't constantly have to be pushed to the background or constantly take a back seat or constantly get denied. So that's just a little bit of a commercial that I did this work-life balance for someone yesterday for another organization. So it's still just kind of in my head. So I wanted to share that as well. But we're approaching an hour here. So I want to be really respectful of your time. Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your input. Jessica, I'm going to give it back to you.
Well, thank you, Deborah. That was great. And just to tag on to the no is a complete sentence. I read a book years ago and it was called Your Best Yes. So you have to say no, but to be able to give your best yes, right? Instead of yes to everything, really choosing your best yes. And saying no can provide an opportunity for someone else, right? Like, you know, if you can't do that, then that gives someone else an opportunity to be able to step in and make that lunch or do that pickup or whatever it is.
Absolutely. Our kids can do so much more than we let them. But, you know, I remember once, just a really quick story. I was like room mom and all this stuff, and they're calling me and can you do the spring party? And I finally just said, you know, I can't do it this year. And she said, oh, okay, no problem. We'll just call the next person on the list. And I'm like, wait a minute. All this time there's been a list. Like, I'm thinking if I don't do it, it's going to fall through the crack. Like, y'all, there's a list. If you say no, somebody else is going to do it.
Yes. And I totally agree. And I am just going to put in the chat a form. So for the participants, we love your feedback and to help us bring these sessions to you and get your feedback on what you all liked. But I will be communicating to those that are looking for CPE. If you responded to the polling questions and had the proper login time, I will send that to you over the next couple of days. But thank you so much. And our next event is June the 23rd, and we'd love to see you then. Thank you.